Hi, I'm Greg Corombos. My guest at this time is Andrew C. McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. He's a contributing editor now at National Review Online, and he's a Fox News Channel contributor. He joined us throughout the Mueller probe and now throughout the Ukraine investigation and the impeachment process. We want to get his thoughts now that President Trump has been formally acquitted of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress allegations. And Andy, thanks so much for being with us.
Greg, it's my pleasure.
Well, let's start with how the Constitution did here. You've got some folks wondering if the system worked as the founders intended. Some say no, since the majority was able to block witnesses and so forth. Others say yes, because the removal of a president should not be a purely or almost purely partisan exercise. So how do you see it?
I see it as the latter. I think there was some question about whether the Constitution was working when the House filed these articles of impeachment, because this really was, in that sense, the impeachment that the framers feared, one that was not based on behavior that there was anything close to a consensus of the public, let alone the criminal there's a Freudian slip. I meant the political class. But there was no consensus that the president should be removed from office, even among those who were willing to concede or happy to say that the president had done things that were wrong. So that's the kind of thing that you don't have impeachment for. There's other ways to deal with that kind of misconduct. So the fact that they were able to, for the first time in history, bring such a partisan impeachment and actually return articles of impeachment and prompt a trial in the Senate, to me, was a situation where you could say the Constitution was not working as it's supposed to. So what's supposed to happen there is the Senate should deny that kind of impeachment, and it has. I don't regard that as an exoneration. I regard it as the misconduct that was alleged and proved was not worthy of impeachment and removal of a president, and the Senate pretty quickly decided it wasn't.
Well, that tees up perfectly Mitt Romney's role in all of this. He, of course, being the only person to cross over. Nancy Pelosi making a point of stating on Thursday that Romney is the only senator in U.S. history to vote to convict a president of his own party. Here's the summation, I guess, of Romney's reason for voting to convict only on the abuse of power charge.
No, it was a flagrant assault on our electoral rights, our national security, and our fundamental values. Corrupting an election to keep oneself in office is perhaps the most abusive and destructive violation of one's oath of office that I can imagine.
Now, Andy, you just explained why you don't believe the allegations, even if absolutely true, rise to the level of removing a president from office. So what's your reaction to Romney's argument there?
Can you imagine that Mitt Romney is telling us that he can't imagine anything worse than this? I mean, really? We had 2 years of an allegation that the president was an agent of the Kremlin, and he can't imagine there's anything worse than Ukraine? Really? I just think we've lost all perspective here. There isn't any proof, and I don't think they did a good enough job. I think the president's lawyers did a perfectly fine job, but I don't think they harped enough on, or even at all on, something that I thought was fairly important, which was, what is the evidence in the record that Joe Biden would have been hurt by, in the 2020 campaign, by an announcement that Ukraine, which is notorious for being one of the most corrupt countries with one of the most corrupt criminal justice systems in the world, was investigating him. I think the dynamic of how that would have worked out is that it would have forced attention to the fact that the United States Department of Justice, which has a whole lot of statutes that they can invoke for corrupt activity, including corrupt activity on the part of public officials, the Trump Justice Department was not investigating either Joe or Hunter Biden for corruption. I think, people would have laughed off the idea that, who cares if he's being investigated by Ukraine? Maybe President Trump, for whatever reason, thought that was significant. I don't see that the American people would have thought it significant. American officials get investigated all the time by kooky governments, and the sort of sub-sovereign components of those governments who want to say that they're war criminals and corrupt and, what have you. And it rolls off our back. We don't pay a bit of attention to it. So to say that this was serious and to go from there to say that American national security was threatened by this cockamamie thing, it's not even true that Ukrainian national security was threatened by it, because not only did they get the weaponry that they were promised, even though there was a hold on it briefly, there's no demonstration that the hold compromised them in any way. But Trump has given them much better defensive lethal equipment than Obama was giving them. And a bunch of the Democratic House impeachment managers actually voted against the aid for Ukraine. So that's how worried they were about aid for Ukraine. So to go from there to say that not only was Ukraine's national security compromised, but ours was, that's insane. I mean, that's just lunatic stuff. And I sit here reacting this way as somebody who says, it's a really bad thing for a president of the United States to ask a foreign government to investigate American citizens for violation of the foreign government's law. We have an American federal government and an American president in order to protect the American people from threatening or overbearing activity by foreign sovereigns. So no one has to convince me that what Trump did here was inappropriate. I not only get that, I see it very clear. But let's not pretend that it's something it's not. It's like you're looking at a petty crime and acting like a capital offense got committed. That's like crazy talk, and it's the reason that nobody pays any attention to anything that comes out of Washington anymore, because they go from one 5-alarm fire to the next, like they have no common sense and no way to distinguish something that's very serious from something that's relatively at least less serious, if not trivial.
Romney did vote to acquit on the obstruction of Congress charge. Are you surprised that no Democrats crossed over on that one, given the fact that the House Democrats weren't willing to go to the courts to fight over the subpoenas for witnesses and documents?
No, I just think, Greg, that it was a very Romney thing to do. I really do. I think, the logic of this was, if you really thought the president was corrupt and count 1 or Article 1 was something that you voted guilty on, then obviously the executive branch taking the position sweepingly across the board that the Congress was entitled to no information whatsoever, you should vote guilty on that too. On the other hand, if you didn't think the conduct was serious enough to vote guilty, so you voted not guilty, then I think you take the position that it's a commonplace in exchange between the two political branches for Congress to ask for more material than it's entitled to, and for the president to refuse to give any material. And then the two of them sit down and they finally accommodate each other in a way that gives the Congress the information that it needs without intruding on the president's privileges. And the president gets to protect his privilege, but still has to allow Congress to conduct its constitutional oversight. So I could easily see the logic in voting guilty on both, and I could see the logic in voting not guilty on both. To split the baby like Romney did, I see as something that is typical of what Romney would do, but I don't really see the sense of it.
All right, Andy, so the acquittal is official. John Roberts can go back to his day job full time now. But the question is this the end of the road? Because literally the same day as we were headed for the final debates and the final vote in the Senate, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler said it's very likely that he's going to subpoena John Bolton, which would obviously lead to a court fight, but ultimately could lead to Bolton testifying before Congress. I saw Adam Schiff on, I think it was MSNBC, saying he's not so sure that that's the right way to go right now, but no decision's been made. What's your expectation here? That the investigation will continue. I have a column about this at the Hill today. It's unfortunate that we use the word acquittal here
which is really a term of art in the criminal law, because anyone who knows anything, sort of basic and fundamental about the criminal law knows that when you either get convicted of something or get acquitted of something in this country, that's the end. In terms of double jeopardy, you have protection against a successive prosecution for the same offense. So they don't get a second bite at the apple. Impeachment is not a judicial proceeding at all or a criminal proceeding. It's a political matter. There's no double jeopardy protection. So as a matter of law, nothing would stop them from turning around next week and indicting or returning or voting the same two articles of impeachment. Now, I hasten to say I'm not saying they're going to do that, but they could. And the way I see it, they voted to conduct an impeachment inquiry. They've never extinguished that vote. While they were conducting it, they started to litigate in the District of Columbia courts. They're now in the D.C. Circuit, still pursuing the testimony of Don McGahn and grand jury material from Mueller's obstruction investigation. They're continuing to pursue Trump's tax returns and anything that they might derive out of that. As you point out, Nadler has said he thinks the Judiciary Committee will probably go forward and at least subpoena Bolton and see where that goes. I expect that it will be more than Bolton ultimately. But, to my mind, Greg, this was never a strategy that was aimed at actually removing Trump. This was always a political strategy that was aimed at bruising him up to try to make him unelectable by the time we get to the stretch run of the campaign later this year. So if I'm right about that, there's no reason to think they'll stop the investigation. They'll continue down that road. I don't think they'll return. I don't think they'll vote any more articles of impeachment because I don't think the Senate trial has helped them. But I absolutely think they'll continue the investigation.
So whatever you thought of the first couple movies, the sequel is coming one way or the other here. It's just a matter of what exactly they focus on and what the courts allow them to do. So in the meantime, Andy, rest up because it sounds like you're going to be busy the rest of the year here. Just depends what form it takes. So thanks for your great insights, and I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Greg.
Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, contributing editor and columnist at National Review Online, Fox News Channel contributor. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.